ministry and was really taking some pressure off what was going on within the children's ministry. So he said, we created this about 5 years ago or 4 years ago. We just wanted to experiment with it. He says it's been one of the best experiments we've ever found. He says it's become kind of an evangelistic engine within the youth area. I'm taking notes, just taking notes. He says it works. And it's just feeding the whole deal. I was like, that's cool. During my sabbatical, I read a book that my buddy Scott told me to read. It was called Sticky Church. Sticky Church. Has anyone ever read the book Sticky Church?
It's like sticky rice?
Sticky rice. It's an interesting, Sticky Church, it's just an analogy that means that how do you get people in your church to become sticky, where they stick or they stay? And it's more not as much about the front door, the back door. And he was talking about how relationships. Another something else that I've been meditating on. It's kind of, and I actually talked to our ministry staff about this on Tuesday, but how do you define a win at Woodbridge? What is it we're doing, and how do you define a win? What does a win look like? You know, like a win. You know, like in the children's ministry, the youth ministry, the adults ministry. How do you define a win? Every week when you sit there and analyze, what did we do last week? What's going on this week? How do you define what a win looks like? And we began talking about that, and you know, why are we here, and what are we doing, and why are we doing what we're doing? And then I'm reminded of Jesus in Matthew 28. Jesus told us to do what? Go make disciples, right? What's a disciple? Follower of Jesus. Believer, receiver, follower of Jesus. So where does discipleship take place? In meaningful relationships. Think about that. Where did discipleship in your past take place in your life? Wasn't it around meaningful relationships? Did discipleship just happen with you sitting underneath a tree? Put this in your vocabulary. Discipleship happens in meaningful relationships. Does anyone disagree? That's solid, isn't it, guys? So where does meaningful relationships take place at Woodbridge? Where does meaningful relationships take place at Woodbridge? Because in meaningful relationships is where what takes place? Discipleship, right? Okay? So, obviously, I mean, at the men's group, women's groups, things like that, meaningful relationships take place, or maybe introduction to relationships. But where does meaningful, meaty relationships happen? It's designed at this church to happen in small groups, right? Because that's where we share our lives with each other. That's where we weep with each other. That's where we show up week to week, and we get to know each other enough. And our desire is to meet, know, and follow Jesus. But as we're meeting in small groups, we get that community where discipleship takes place. So how do you define a win? For me, guys, I think a win at Woodbridge is not someone that walks in the front door of the church, or even someone that sits in the sanctuary of the church. But the ultimate win is if we could get a person to go from the foyer to the sanctuary and into a small group. Because if they're in a small group, that's where discipleship will take place, because discipleship happens in meaningful relationships. Right? What do you think?
That's where the relationship takes place as well. Meeting people like-minded.
Yeah. But discipleship takes place within that relationships.
Correct.
But if there's no relationships, then we don't have discipleship, right? So here's an interesting thought. How are we doing? You guys okay? Rolling? In this one book, and actually this is the philosophy that my friend is doing out in Arizona. In the book Sticky Church that I read, and I encourage you guys to read as well, it talked about this thing, and now here's a buzzword. I don't know if you've heard it before. maybe put this way, but it's called sermon-based small groups. Have you ever heard that terminology before? Yeah. Sermon-based small groups. And, I mean, basically the concept is that the small group, when they meet during that week, the discussion is based upon the message or the sermon that was given that Sunday. Pretty simple, pretty neat. And I know about it, but this guy, as he talked about it, he said, you need to do this in a church because things happen when the people that gather during the midweek for their small group, that they're at least the discussion component has a biblical emphasis that comes from the message on Sunday. And he's real quick to point out the main purpose of small group is not content of information, it's relationship, it's discussion, it's facilitated. But in that iron sharpens iron, or that stirring in happens. So you just use the message from Sunday as the discussion point for people to get together and speak about deeper things. But this was some things that this guy says makes this, that he noticed as he began doing this at his church. He said he noticed that immediately after he started doing sermon-based small groups, he started noticing that people had an increased attentiveness on Sunday morning. Why?
Because they're going to be talking about it in a small group.
I better be listening because I'm going to be talking about this on Sunday or on my Wednesday night group, right? So then he noticed that not only did people, he says, I became immediately a better preacher by doing absolutely nothing except changing into sermon-based small groups, because in the sermon-based small groups, all of a sudden people started paying attention more. And not only did they begin paying attention more, guess what they began doing? They began getting their pencil and paper and they began taking notes. Why? Because they're talking about it in their small group, right? Yeah. He says, because of that, he says immediately there became an increased application of the message, that people not just only on a Sunday morning were listening to something, but they were going to be discussing it during the midweek. And I use that analogy of the chocolate milk, you pour it in, you got to stir it in. Like the small group becomes a place where it's being stirred in more. The ideas and the concepts of Scripture that was placed before. He said that he noticed that his CD sales started going way up because people that maybe couldn't be there said, would you please get one for me? Or their hits on the internet are like going, I wasn't at church on Sunday, but I'm at my small group this week, so I need to listen to the message so I can engage in. It's kind of cool. He said that there was what it just did, and he was just kind of guessing this, but it created more of a unity and a focus within their church. That the church kind of marched on the same page. And he said in the end it ended up making him a better teacher, and it ended up making the church a better church. Now, I've heard about this before, and I said, yeah, that's a good idea. I wasn't converted. Now I'm converted.
Amen.
I'm converted. Pastor Frank got converted over the summer. That as this guy just really bent my ear, I'm like, I get it. I finally get it, I guess. So let me just share with you some things that I would like to see us make as goals for 2015 at Woodbridge. Goal number 1. I want to tune up our vision statement, and I'm going to steal my buddy Scott's. But he said I could, so steal, such a apprehend, borrow, I don't know. Give me another one. What's more right? Use.
Share best practice.
What?
Share best practice.
Can I share best for your car? You know, but I want to tune up our vision to say, the vision of Woodbridge is to help all people, or people from all nations, meet, know, and follow Jesus. And I want to be able to, my goal is as a pastor is if we beat this up enough that within 6 months I could ask somebody at our church and they will be able to say it. So I want to propose that we tune up our vision statement to be more popped in that way. And I like that. Meet, that's evangelism, no. But I dig on that. I think we've lost that concept of following God. You know, I know there's a lot of people in our church that meet him and probably know about him, but they're not making decisions based on Christ at all in our church. And that's that follow component. Yeah, I know about him, but I'm going to drop my wife anyway. You know? What are you doing? Well, we're here to help you not just meet and know, to have you say a prayer and accept Jesus, but to follow him. I just love that in it. So I'm looking at, I want to tune up our discipleship at our church, in our small group area, with this sermon-based small groups. That's something I want to gun for. Now, by the way, so I just have a really good friend of mine named Jason Carson. Did you remember the band called the Supertones? Do you remember the band Supertones? Mm-hmm. Well, their lead drummer is going to be here tomorrow. Jason Carson is a kid who was in my youth group years ago. He's toured all over the world. He was the second biggest Christian band in the 90s. Made a lot of money. He's got his house and all that. He's doing good. He was in my youth group at Mission Hills. And he's now planning a church in Mission Viejo. And I'm just happy and excited for him. And I was talking to him. He's asked me to mentor him, and I'm doing some of that. I hung out with him a little bit, and he goes, "Man, I told him about it. He goes, I'm going to do this at my new church plant. It's called Encounter Church. They're going to start up sometime around Easter." Does he have an easier time initiating this than me?
Yes.
Why? By the way, the answer is yes. Does he have an easier time creating this in his church than I get to in mine?
Yeah. Yes.
Why?
Because it's a new church.
It's a brand new church.
Clean slate.
It's a clean slate. There's nothing planted in the flower bin, and he can plant any flowers he wants to. What's my challenges?
Bring about change.
I've got to sit down with all my small group leaders, all of them, and just hang out with them, get to know them, and then begin to introduce to them, this is a new idea. This is a way that I propose we begin doing small groups at Woodbridge. And by doing this is the reasons why it's good to do this. This is when a person comes in, every Sunday at the end of the sermon it says, hey guys, in your folder, take that out and take it to your small group this week, because here's the questions and things you'll be discussing. People that are in the church that aren't in a small group will sit there and go, I'm not doing that. I should be. Or a new person that comes in the church and maybe come 2, 3, 4 times, pretty soon they're going to ask, well, where is the small group that I get to meet in to discuss this more? It just makes sense beyond belief the more you think about it. The problem I'm going to have is that how do you turn some leaders aren't going to do that, and that's cool. I'm hoping I can get more too, but it's going to take some work to do. For 2:15, I propose that we tune up our vision statement and make it more clear and cleaner. For 2:15, I propose that we tune up our discipleship program and our small groups ministry, the philosophy in it, and the sermon-based model. For 2:15, I propose that we take a hard look at a 5th and 6th grade program and putting some resources and vision behind that. And if we get the right people, I think we will find the same results that they have out in Arizona. It's just some vision. Here's another vision, guys. And this is one that I think some of you've heard, we've talked about, but my friend Scott said, he said, Frank, you see, what we have at Woodbridge, what's called a blended worship service. Do you understand what that means? That means that we blend hymns with modern music. We blend them together. And our service is called a blended worship service. You with me? Here's the problem. Well, he says that in our denomination, there are no churches in our denomination that are growing with a blended worship service. Because in a blended worship service, no one's ever completely happy. The older people sang a hymn, but they didn't sing enough hymns. The younger people can't play the drums loud enough or get rocked out because it hurts some person's ear, the ear things you stick in. So we've created what's called a blended worship service. And all the counsel I'm getting, he says, Frank, at some point you've got to go to a traditional service, a modern service. And in the traditional service, you just make it the best traditional service you can, and people will be happy there. And then you make a modern worship service, and you make it modern. And if you do that, then the younger people will come more because it's modern. Now, I've known this since last year, and I've thought about this. We have to, I think we need to radically look at how do we do this at Woodbridge. I think sometime in the year 2015, we got to move to a 9 o'clock traditional service and make it a great service. And probably everybody that's frustrated in Irvine because there is no traditional service, they'll come. No, I get to sing this song. And I love the hymns. I mean, I'm all over that. But then we turn around and we can turn up the volume and rock the place out and create a modern worship service, which is going to take some investment. But we need to look at this. So, hey guys, here's my deal. At least these are the four I'm looking at. I'm really excited. Last year, as we were sitting here, you were called the Mystery X person. We have Mystery X individual out there. We've got to find a great worship or a youth pastor, a next-gen pastor for our ministry. It's just a huge hole. And we now just need to really sustain you. That's a goal of mine, to sustain what you're doing, Danny, and to make sure that you've got the resources that you need and the ministry needs to make you fly. And that's a goal that's in my heart for 2015. Now, so, does anyone have any questions? I've talked too much. What I did, God's been speaking in my heart. I know where I spent some time on. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
What's your friend?
Whoa, wait, that was great. Okay, raise your hand now. That's my wife. My wife's a teacher. Okay, now I recognize. So we'll recognize Reggie over here.
From Division 14, how well did we do? Do we have a matrix? How many small groups did we create? So how do we execute Division 14?
That's probably a net. I'm looking at 215, but we can talk about that, and we will within leadership team. And actually, I've got an exercise where we can spend some time doing that. Marilyn can talk about that. Marilyn, how many youth small groups did we start with? Get off. And now we're at 16. So we grew 5 new small groups so far this year. I recognize my brother Casey.
Can you expand a little bit more on seeker friendly?
On what? Seeker friendly?
Yeah, because my concern is...
Good question. So watch this. Seeker friendly means that when we get up there, we think more about a person that might be there that's not a Christian, and we want to become more seeker friendly and just acknowledging that that person might be there and analyzing what we say and how we say it to be more sensitive to a person that's a seeker. We're not driven in that we're creating the whole service for the seeker, but we're becoming more sensitive to them. For example, let me just give an example. So the last Sunday of the month is the Sunday that we're going to give testimonies, and we're going to give an opportunity to receive Christ. We're going to give a gospel talk, specifically the cross, at some point in the message. Okay. The week before that, I would be more sensitive in the announcements and saying, hey, for those of you that are, that have people that are still, that might be seeking and looking for Jesus, next Sunday would be a great service to bring them to, because clarification and just a real understanding of what a Christian is will be given. Instead of saying, bring your non-Christian friend next Sunday. Because if I say, bring your non-Christian friend next Sunday, the person that brought their non-Christian friend this Sunday, the person that's the non-Christian sitting there, how does that make him feel? So I'm becoming more sensitive to that person. Does that make sense? So everything we do to communicate becomes more sensitive to that the seeker is out there and they're not a believer. Does that make sense, Casey? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the content, though.
The content of what?
The content of the message.
Okay, good question. What that would do is it makes me have to, when I say, in a seeker, for example, instead of saying the Apostle Paul, says this. I might say, the Apostle Paul. You guys know the Apostle Paul. I'll talk about, people don't know who the Apostle Paul